A division filled with new faces and the reigning MVP. The AFC East is always a fun one, and today we're going to break down every team's offseason, predict their record, and boy do I have some hot takes along the way. If you enjoyed, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. Let's get into it. All right, are you ready for this? I think the Miami Dolphins are going to be a bottom 5 team in the NFL this season, and it is not because they lack the talent. I want you to hear me on that. It is because of the factors that are outside of their control, at least for the most part, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. I will start with their draft. I love it. You brought in Kenneth Grant, a guy that might be the best interior defensive lineman in the class, and you also brought in Big Boy Jonah out of Arizona, a guy that has shown the capability to play inside and outside on the offensive line, which is much needed here in Miami. Outside of that, traditionally in free agency, you didn't really do much. You brought in James Daniels and Zach Wilson. I mean, that's whatever. You lost Raheem Mostert and Javon Holland, some good veteran mouthpieces there. But their offseason was pretty null outside of their draft. And then last week happened. You traded Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith for Minkah Fitzpatrick. Practically that was the deal, and some draft capital. So this is a roster that it has some new faces going into this upcoming season. But I ultimately think that due to these couple of reasons that I will mention, I think they're going to struggle in a lot of different ways this year. You have a quarterback that his health, unfortunately, is very unstable. This is a guy that you're probably only going to get half the season out of Tua Tagovailoa this upcoming season. You have a quarterback and a coach together that have shown the inability to win big-time games, whether in division or out. This is a team that also has to play the AFC North and NFC West this season. So with all of those factors that I've mentioned, their inability to win big-time games, their quarterback's health, and the fact that they've lost some pieces this offseason, I don't think that this is a team that's going to bounce back to what they were a few seasons ago. And let's get into their schedule. I do think that they bounce. I do think they open up strong, and I'll say that. Beating Indianapolis on the road, we don't know if it's going to be Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson. I don't think it matters. Miami, with that defensive front that they have and the speed offensively, they should be able to get off to a hot start, beating Indianapolis, and then I will think beating Drake May in only his second real start as a full-time starter here in the NFL. Miami gets off to a 2-0 start. But after that, you see it. There's a lot of red, man. You go into Buffalo. You have the Jets, which is a tough divisional matchup. Carolina in Carolina. They should be a much better football team. The Chargers, I gave you that win because their secondary has got a lot worse. In Cleveland, against a fierce pass rush. Atlanta, on the road, it's a tough environment against a great offense. Baltimore, of course, they might be the best team in the conference. And then in the second half of the season, I don't think it gets much better. You have Buffalo, Washington right before the bye week. If your confidence in the team morale is not killed by this point, I don't know what's going to do it. But I will say after the bye week, you have some pretty easy games. I think you beat New Orleans. You split with the Jets. But outside of that, in Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Tampa Bay, New England, this is the team that has arguably the hardest schedule in the entire NFL this season. And due to the factors that I listed earlier, it's just a bad combination. So for Miami, I think it's going to be a bad season. You can go 5-11, let's say at best 7-10, and you're going to get a pretty good draft pick going into next season. Now for the team that dethroned the New England Patriots in the Tom Brady era, and they've taken over. It is the Bills era under Josh Allen, at least as far as AFC East dominance. They had a pretty good depth draft, and I'll say that. Maxwell Harrison, speedy corner out of Kentucky, TJ Sanders out of South Carolina, and Deion Walker, a 6'7" freak on that defensive line out of Duke, if I'm not mistaken. But outside of that, their draft was okay. What really won me over this offseason was their free agency. You bring in Joey Bosa on like a $10 million deal. Larry Ogunjobi's always been a solid addition up front. Josh Palmer, Trey White, whatever, right? But I really like the defensive line additions that they've made in the draft and in free agency this offseason. But this is a roster that has been so close to getting over the top of the mountain these last couple years, with the Chiefs now coming off a Super Bowl loss and regressing a little bit. Maybe this is the best season yet to get over that and to get to the Super Bowl and to potentially win it, getting that monkey off of Josh Allen's back and this franchise's back, because they're one of the few franchises that have yet to win the Super Bowl. Maybe this is the year to do it. Now, starting off their schedule this year, I do think they open up with a loss against Baltimore. Again, Baltimore has a little bit, maybe they want to avenge that playoff loss. There we go, right? But outside of that, I think Buffalo bounces back handsomely, beating the Jets, Miami, New Orleans, Atlanta. I have them losing to New England there. At that point in the season, New England's hot, and I think that just rolls over. Regardless, going into the bye week, at week 7, you're 4-2. You're still in a very good spot as far as winning your division and the AFC, period. I think you beat Carolina. You lose to the Chiefs, and I'll come back to that in a moment. You beat Miami, but you lose to Tampa Bay as well. I think Tampa Bay is just going to be a shootout, and I have Tampa Bay and Baker getting that one, maybe in a late classic of a finish. But for that Kansas City game, what have we seen historically in this Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes regular season rivalry? We've seen Josh Allen getting the upper hand in the regular season, but in the postseason, it flips. It goes to Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. I think this year we're going to see a little bit of a difference. So that's why I gave Kansas City that one. For Buffalo, you're 6-4, heading into the great tail end of the regular season, and you have a tough stretch relatively. At Houston, at Pittsburgh, you have Cincinnati, at New England, at Cleveland. I know Cleveland's not a good football team, but it's one of the best home environments in football. And then Philadelphia as well in that stretch. I think you really prove it these last 2 months of the season. We are a Super Bowl caliber team, and we are the team to beat in the NFL, quite frankly, with a lot of these wins. And I gave Cincinnati that win there. So Buffalo, you finish the season maybe the hottest in football. You're 12-5, and no doubt you win the division. Now, the new toy on the block that everybody wants to play with, and everybody's jumping on the bandwagon, the New England Patriots, now in the Mike Vrabel era. They hired him, and this is a guy that's already left his mark. This is a team that had so much salary cap room to work with in free agency, and boy, did they use it. You brought in Milton Williams, Harold Landry to help out that defensive line. You brought in Carlton Davis to help out on the back end, one of the most underrated corners in the league, and you also brought in Stephon Diggs to give your rookie quarterback not only a loaded defense, but a number one option offensively. Now, in the draft, they might have had the best draft in the entire NFL. On offense alone, you bring in a new blindside tackle in Will Campbell, Travion Henderson, Kyle Williams, a very underrated wide receiver prospect, Jared Wilson to be your next center for years to come. And on defense, I think the most underrated defensive player in the class that doesn't get talked about is Braden Swinson out of LSU. Just turn on his tape. You see all the fierceness, all the toughness, and that just mentality that you want on any football team that's trying to get their team in the right direction. So Braden Swinson to help out with all those offensive additions, and of course the veterans in the offseason. They had a great one. I'll just say that. The only real piece they lost was Devon Godchaux. But again, they replaced them and they brought in maybe some better players, to be honest with you. I do think they start the season a little bit slow, just getting used to Mike Vrabel, getting used to the Drake May getting used to Mike Vrabel, them bouncing off of each other. And ultimately, this is still a relatively younger team. So I do think they start a little bit slow, losing to Las Vegas, Miami, and Pittsburgh. Now, they get their first win of the season against Carolina, and that does flip a switch. I think they win the next 4 straight games after Carolina, in Buffalo, in New Orleans, in Tennessee, and then Cleveland to round it off. Those are all very winnable games outside of Buffalo. But again, Buffalo, in Buffalo, that's going to be the game that New England fans can see and say, we are a playoff caliber team this season. Now, week 9 in Atlanta, you lose that one, but I think you bounce back in Tampa Bay and to the Jets. You win those, you split going into the bye week. So now all of a sudden, New England fans, you're 8-5, man. It's been a long time since we've been here, quite frankly, since Tom Brady left town. But now you're heading into the last month of the season, and just look at that stretch. You have Buffalo, who's going to want some revenge. You're going into Baltimore, into the Jets, who are going to want some revenge. And the same can be said about Miami. So it's a tough stretch, no doubt about it. And I think you split them. I think you lose to the 2 Super Bowl contenders. You win the divisional games that you're going to end up, I think, sweeping both Miami and the Jets. I'm mistaken. You're splitting with Miami. You're sweeping the Jets. There we go. Regardless, you're 10-7, and I'm not going to spoil it, but you're in a pretty good spot. And finally, here, we'll kick it off with the New York Jets that have kind of fallen from grace, at least as far as preseason expectations. The last 2 years, you had Aaron Rodgers. We all thought they were going to make at least a playoff run, and who knows what can happen from there. But that was anything but the truth. They struggled a large part because Aaron Rodgers and his offense could just never get going. The defense, of course, the talent is there, and this offseason, they've added to it. You brought in guys like Malachi Moore and Azariah Thomas to help out in the secondary next to Sauce Gardner. On offense, you drafted guys like Mason Taylor and Armand Membu, maybe the best tackle in the class. And then in the offseason, it all started because you brought in Aaron Glenn and he sat down and he had a meeting with Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers was basically told, hey, you're not welcome here anymore. We don't want you here in New York. So they cut him. So now in free agency, after having a pretty good draft, Aaron Glenn decided Justin Fields was the guy to run the ship. So you bring in Justin Fields, a guy that has been dying for another chance to start. And hey, last year with the Pittsburgh Steelers, he was what, 3-1 or 3-0? Regardless, Justin Fields had a pretty good showing in Pittsburgh last season. So outside of losing some of these veterans that were in the Aaron Rodgers era, you've now transitioned into a younger and more exciting Aaron Glenn era. So difference from Aaron to Aaron. Regardless, let's get into their season. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team, but I do think this is a year that's about improvement and just showing fight. Think back to that first year where Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson, and Aaron Glenn took over in those key positions, calling the shots for Detroit. In that first year of the rebuild, they weren't a good win-loss football team, but they were a team that was showing fight. They were in a lot of games they weren't supposed to be in. But ultimately, again, I don't think their win-loss record is going to represent how good this team will actually be at the end of the season. But ultimately, you get a lot of wins as far as the teams you're supposed to beat, like New Orleans, Cleveland, and Miami. But outside of that, man, you're 5-12. You're in a position where you could be a 7-win football team. But ultimately, I'm just giving you a better draft pick. So for the Jets, you head into a very interesting offseason where based on whether Justin Fields plays good or great, you could go and draft a quarterback. If not, if he plays solid and you see the potential and you want him there for years to come, you can get a guy like Caleb Downs or one of these talented defensive players to add to this core going forward. But here is the quick recap of the AFC East. I have the Bills making the playoffs and winning it. The Patriots making the playoffs as the 7 seed at 10-7. First year under Mike Vrabel making the playoffs. All that dude does is win. Outside of that, the Jets and Miami, underwhelming seasons as far as the win-loss department. But for the Jets, I think you see the promise going forward. And for Miami, it's pretty bleak. They're over in the sunshine state. That's what I was trying to say. For Miami, I think it's going to be a bit of an end of an era, a nail in the coffin, so to speak. And I think we could see a lot of these names being moved or fired in the offseason like Mike McDaniel. But that's going to do it here, man. Let me know your predictions in the comments section. But at the end of the day, next week, we have the NFC East, and we're closing out on these record breakdowns and predictions.